Hi, thanks for joining me today. Today we're going to be talking about yoga and fertility. Fertility is a sensitive topic for many people. When we are trying to conceive, it's a biological desire. It might be even more than a desire, it's a need. Our bodies are designed to create children, and many times we desperately want to be a parent. When it's difficult or challenging for us to conceive, we can have psychological distress and dis-ease. This psychological distress and dis-ease can actually precipitate into the body, causing the adrenals to be taxed and the overall function of the body to be decreased or diminished. It's important to understand that typically it takes 12 months for a couple to conceive. That's without any fertility problems at all. If you have been on birth control or if you had any sort of implanted device, it could take longer. Be compassionate with yourself and patient with the process. You're exactly where you're supposed to be right now in this moment. You might have students that are struggling with fertility. You might even have students who are struggling with fertility and looking to use yoga to help them with their fertility issues. I think this is a great idea. Yoga can help us to regulate the nervous system and come back to balance. Yoga helps us to create an environment internally where our cells are in homeostasis. When our cells are in homeostasis, we're in homeostasis. And when we're in homeostasis, it's easier to conceive. Yoga is a tool. It's not a cure. If you've been struggling with infertility for a long time, or if your students have been struggling with infertility for a long time, it's important to talk to a physician and to get an opinion from a professional. You might even get a couple opinions. I struggled with infertility for years. My husband and I wanted to conceive, and we tried everything. IVF failed. IUI failed. We couldn't get pregnant. And then it happened. It still was medically assisted, but after a while, it happened. And the biggest factor in my conceiving was my mental health and well-being. You see, before we were able to conceive, I was obsessed and erratic about conception. I would put all of my energy into working out and eating right. I would go through a treatment and then I would stop everything and sit in desperation waiting to find out if I was pregnant or not. If I wasn't pregnant, I would beat myself up and I would ask, why me? And then finally, one day, after a failed IVF treatment cycle, I decided I didn't marry my husband to be a mother. I married my husband because I loved him. And even if it didn't look the way I thought it was going to look, I still loved him and wanted to be with him. That realization helped me to release some stress and anxiety around the process. And within 3 months, I was pregnant with my first child. That first pregnancy was challenging, and there were a lot of psychological issues that kept coming up for me. I didn't have the tools to deal with them, and so I dealt with them in maybe some inappropriate ways. I gained about 120 pounds during that pregnancy because I was so scared to eat fresh foods. We were in Kuwait, and I was fearful of different bacterias and different diseases. In retrospect, it was unfounded fear, but it was all I had to go on. If I had had a strong and stable yoga practice when I was in that experience, it would have helped me to come back to center, to regulate my nervous system, and to listen to my body. My whole experience might have been different. In fact, I know it was different. Because after I had my first child, I started practicing yoga. That's when I found the practice in earnest. And that's when my whole awareness shifted. We went to Israel and I got pregnant with my second child. And that pregnancy was a completely different experience because I had the tools found in yoga. I was able to self-regulate. I was able to listen to my body. I was able to rest. I was able to recover. And I was able to carry a child to term without enormous amounts of stress and anxiety. Yoga is a fantastic tool to help us to cope with fertility. But again, it's not a cure. Let your students know that it is a complementary therapy to allopathic intervention, and that if they're interested in leveraging the healing power of yoga, you are there to support them. There's nothing that a student can or can't do when they're in a fertility treatment cycle if they weren't in a fertility treatment cycle. In fact, the best way to handle any fertility treatment cycles is to carry on just as you would if you weren't in a treatment cycle. Continue to do and live your life the way you would if you weren't trying to conceive. Even having a glass of wine or going for a run is perfectly fine. In fact, when we stop doing those things in anticipation of getting pregnant, we actually increase our stress. And the increase in stress increases our cortisol levels. And the increase in cortisol levels can have a negative impact on conception. Let it go. Breathe. Be present. Enjoy the process. And above all else, remind your students who are using yoga to help support them during their experience with infertility that they're not alone. There are other people just like them, and there are places where they can find community to support them in mindful conception.